Hello, dear listener. So, a few weeks ago, I put a little question sticker on my Instagram saying that I would do an FAQ episode right here on the podcast. I've been procrastinating on this one a bit, honestly, because some of your questions go really deep and some of them made me really pause. I had to sit with them and actually figure out my answers for myself before I could even attempt to answer them publicly on the podcast. It inspired some self-reflection on my side, but there were also fun questions. The questions of like, what's in my backpack? Questions about travel, about writing, love, and heartbreak, and what it's actually like to live this kind of life. So I guess this episode is a mix of both, the light and the heavy, the practical and the personal. And I loved reading through your questions because they remind me that this world that I live in, this strange, wandering, nomadic life, still feels mysterious to people. And I think I realized reading through your questions and your DMs that people are actually quite curious about the way I live and how I'm able to do it. That's why I wanted to record this episode, to peel it back a little bit and to be really honest with you and myself. So I hope this episode feels like a long voice note to a friend, and consider it part confession, part behind the scenes, and wherever you're listening from. Whether you're stuck in traffic, or you're walking to work, or you're on a plane flying halfway across the world towards something new and uncertain, I really hope that something in here meets you where you are. Welcome back to Lost and Found, the podcast where we're figuring things out in real time, together. I'm your host, Carmen Vit, and if you're a new listener, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. Before we get into the questions, I think it might help to give you a little bit of context, so just a quick snapshot of who I am and how I live. I'm 24, and first and foremost, I consider myself a writer. I've published 3 books. The most recent one came out just a few months ago and called Untethered, A Beginner's Guide to Solo Travel. And if you're curious, I'll link it in the show notes for you to check out. But I've also published fiction books in Afrikaans, a poetry anthology, and then somewhere in between all of that, I write a blog. I'll also link that. So yes, I consider myself a writer. But outside of writing, I also work full-time as the head of growth for a marketing agency based in London. And the beautiful part of my job is that it's fully remote, which means I get to live and work from anywhere in the world. So I've been doing this for about 2.5 years now. And I guess you can call me a digital nomad at this point, though I still like to mix a little bit of that backpacker chaos with the digital nomad life whenever I can. Okay, that's a little bit of background. Now, with that being said, I grouped today's questions into 3 categories. The first category is questions about travel and my lifestyle and my work. The second category is more about my writing, creative life. And the third category goes more into the inner world and I guess more philosophical questions about mindset, relationships, stuff like that. Okay, let's start with the first one. This is actually a question I get quite often, which is really interesting. And the question is, what's in your backpack and how much does it weigh? Really just clothes, basically. Obviously, I have some toiletries. I have my laptop, my journal, phone, AirPods, and then I also have 1 pair of sandals and 1 pair of running shoes. Although most of the time I just love walking barefoot. But yeah, that's it. If I ever need anything more, something special, like maybe I need hiking gear if I'm going on a hike, I would just rent the gear. And I think, if I remember correctly, my backpack, which is this big green backpack that looks like one of those military grade backpacks, when I was traveling through the US and I was taking the Greyhound all up and down the East Coast, the bus drivers who were always helping me load my backpack into the bus always thought I was in the military, which is quite funny. But yeah, the backpack weighs about, I think 17 kilograms, if I'm not mistaken. And that's it. Yeah, that's what I carry around with me. The next question, which is also one I get really often, is which countries have been your favorites and why? Oh no, this is so difficult to answer because I've truly loved every single country I've been to for different reasons. And I think a big part of what makes a country special to me is the people I meet there and the friendships I formed. So if I'm going purely on people and friendships, I would say some of my favorite countries are India, the Dominican Republic, and Vietnam. I've met some of my lifelong best friends in these 3 countries. And when it comes to the best food experiences, definitely India and Thailand. For nature, I would say Costa Rica. For personal growth, Nicaragua, because I spent a beautiful season of my life there healing from quite a bad breakup. And I was just doing lots of yoga and ecstatic dance and meditation. And I lived on this kind of hippie commune permaculture farm. And it was amazing. I learned a lot about myself there. I grew into my personality almost while in Nicaragua. So that will always be a special country for me. And then just for overall lifestyle and energy, Argentina was amazing, Croatia, Italy. I could go on. I could probably give every single country that I've been to some kind of favorite category. I could never pick just one. So I'm going to leave it at that. Then, what is one luxury or guilty pleasure you'll happily splurge on while traveling? So, overall, I definitely have a budget and I try not to spend too much money. I'll happily stay in hostels, I'll share a dorm with 10 people, or like this past weekend, I was camping with some friends on Cham Island, which is just off of the coast of Hoi An here in Vietnam. And that was incredible. We just slept outside in hammocks. We woke up to the sun rising over the South China Sea. We slept under the stars. So I'm definitely not fussy when it comes to accommodation. But if I splurge, I definitely splurge on wine. If I want to treat myself, I'll take myself out to a nice dinner, have a really good Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon, and that for me is a luxury that I will happily splurge on. I'll much rather spend money on that than on fancy accommodation. Some people think that's crazy, but that's just me. Next question, has your way of traveling changed over the years? Yes, definitely. When I just started traveling and living this digital nomad life, I was just a content writer. So I made less money, my budget was tighter. I was also a bit more of an inexperienced backpacker. So I mainly stayed in hostels so that I could save more and it was easy for me to make friends. But as time went on and I got a promotion and also more responsibilities at work, and I also realized that I want to do this long term. I want to turn it into a sustainable lifestyle. So I started looking for more homestay style accommodation. So basically, you're renting a room in someone's home, or you're living in a shared apartment, or sometimes, very rarely, I would find my own little apartment. And that really helps me with routine. I also got more comfortable with finding community outside of a hostel setting where it's super easy to just meet people. So if you're living on your own, it's really on you to go out and find like-minded people. And I think with practice, that got easier too. And that nicely leads into my next question, which is, how do you make friends while solo traveling? So many people ask me this question, but they also ask me, how do you make friends as an adult? So I kind of want to group these two questions together. I think it's something that a lot of people wonder, especially if you just moved to a new city by yourself. And it's different because when you're traveling, you're surrounded by other travelers who a lot of the times are also solo travelers, so they want to connect. But let's say you just moved to a new city, you're working, you're by yourself, you're not in a setting or in a context where other people are actively wanting to make friends. People probably already have their own circles. It's harder then to find your people. So how do we do that? Firstly, I want to talk about the traveling part. So when you're solo traveling, you're naturally more open to connection. You're curious, you're alert, you're looking at the world with softer eyes, and people feel that. But when you travel with a friend or a partner, it's like you already have this built-in comfort zone. But when you're alone, that comfort zone disappears, and in its place is this beautiful openness. And that openness to the world is magnetic. As for where I meet people, if you're staying in hostels, like I said, that part is easy. There's a natural community built around the shared kitchens and the group dinners and rooftop drinks and pool parties, so connection comes really easy. But if you're staying somewhere more private, it just takes a little bit more initiative. So most cities, I would say, especially ones with big expat communities or digital nomad communities, if you ask around, you'll rather quickly find WhatsApp groups or Facebook groups, and you'll find out about language exchange meetups, community dinners, things like yoga or dance classes or pottery classes. And I've even made a lot of friends here in Hoi An playing pickleball. Those are all great places to meet like-minded people. Oh, also co-working spaces. that is such an underrated way to meet grounded, interesting people who are very often on a similar path because they're also living abroad, they're working remotely. But honestly, the biggest shift to making friends while traveling or making friends as an adult is internal because you have to be the one who starts the conversation. So say hi to the person next to you in the cafe if you think they have a nice vibe. Compliment the book they're reading or their tattoo, or ask where they're from, what they're working on, what brought them here. These are all great openers. People are usually a lot kinder and more open than we expect. And it's like they're just waiting for permission to connect. We all are. And I'll say this, making friends as an adult, whether you're traveling or just living your everyday life, it can feel really awkward at first. I know this. But I've also learned that the friendships we make as adults often run way deeper than the ones from childhood because they're not built on convenience or circumstance like our friends from childhood. But adult friendships are built on choice. You're not just friends because you sat next to each other in class. You're friends because you recognize something in each other, a shared curiosity maybe, or warmth or way of seeing the world, and then you chose to continue meeting up with this person, building a relationship, a connection, and that's beautiful. So, if you are craving connection, whether you're traveling or not, start small. That's what I would say. Be open, say yes, show up as yourself, even when it feels scary, and show up to the places where you know like minded people will be. If you love reading, join a book club. If you love dancing, go to a dance class, go to a yoga class. Put yourself out of your comfort zone and in the position to actually meet interesting people. And you'll find that it's actually easier to make friends than maybe you thought. Because the truth is, there are people out there looking for you too. A lot of people feel like this, that it's hard to make friends as an adult, but they crave it. So it's not just you. Your people are out there. You just haven't met them yet. Okay, another big question I get a lot is, how did I actually get my remote job? And any advice for someone who wants to start living this digital nomad lifestyle? This is probably the question I get most. And I completely understand why. Because when you see people working from cafes in Lisbon or from the beach in Bali or rooftops, it can look like this impossible dream. And you wonder, how in the hell did somebody accomplish this? But really, it's more doable than you think. So for me, it all happened really gradually. I definitely didn't wake up one day and decide, okay, I'm going to be a digital nomad. No, I started freelancing even when I was in high school. And then while I was studying, I was writing blogs and managing social media and editing books. So basically taking on any creative job that I could find online. And that's kind of how I slowly started building a little portfolio. I made a few connections and I learned how to sell my skills online. Then, after a few years of freelancing and after I finished my studies, I landed my full-time remote job through LinkedIn, actually. Fiverr is good for finding freelancing gigs, but I find that LinkedIn is really the place where you should go if you're looking for something full-time. So that's how I did it, but finding a remote job is definitely not the only way that you can travel long-term. I've met so many people on the road, and everyone has their own version of this life. Some go home to their home countries. They work incredibly hard for like 2 months. And then for the next year, they travel really cheaply. So then they would volunteer where they can and stretch their savings, or they would hitchhike or stuff like that. Other people would travel on their savings until they run out of money. And then they find cash in hand jobs wherever they land. Australia, also, for example, has become this kind of in between stopover for so many travelers. So people spend 6 months there working and saving before they head back out to travel again. And then you have people who only travel for a month or two at a time, and they just put in their PTO time at their jobs. Others go fully remote, living the digital nomad life year round. There's no one way to do it. And that's actually, for me, one of the most beautiful parts, because there is no script, no blueprint, no single definition of success. You completely make it up as you go. You curate your life like art, piece by piece. And so it feels like something that's really authentically yours. That's for me the best part of this life. But is it for everyone? Honestly, no, I don't think it is. I think every single person should definitely take a solo trip once in their life. Even if it's just a weekend in a nearby town or a few weeks somewhere new, everyone should do that 100%. But full-time travel? No, I don't think that's for everyone, and it absolutely doesn't need to be. Because if you're someone who thrives on routine or you feel most fulfilled by consistency and family and a strong sense of home, then this lifestyle might not make you very happy. A lot of people need structure to feel creative and productive, and that's completely valid. Something that really irritates me about the travel influencer world is this unspoken narrative that a 9 to 5 life at home is bad, or that living a stable life makes you somehow less free or less brave. And it's just complete bullshit. No life is better than another, as long as you choose it. What matters is that your life feels honest and aligned with who you are. Now, on that point, something that's quite interesting is that a lot of people sometimes assume that I live this way because I'm lost. Or maybe I'm running away from something, or I'm trying to be different. But none of that is true. I live this way because I know myself. I know that no matter how much I love my family or South Africa, I start to feel stagnant and depleted if I stay in one place too long. My creativity and my curiosity just fades when my days start to look the same. Or worse, when they start to feel the same. And I mean, I couldn't stand routines even when I was younger. Just the idea of going to the same gym at the same time every morning made me restless. I loved school, but the predictability of it completely drained me. I've always been someone who needed variety and uncertainty to feel alive. So I've learned about myself that I thrive in not knowing. For me, life needs that element of surprise, not knowing where I'll be next week or who I'll meet or what opportunities might show up. That's what keeps me awake to the world and what makes me feel free. And living this way constantly reminds me how big and beautiful life is and how small my problems are in comparison. It helps me to zoom out, to remember that things don't have to be so heavy, and I can take my life seriously without taking myself too seriously. But again, that's me. Maybe for you, that sounds exhausting. Maybe building a home is your adventure. And that's amazing. There's no one-size-fits-all version of freedom. And as for the people who think that I'm lost, I have two things to say. Firstly, you can be lost anywhere. Just because I'm a traveler without a plan or an itinerary doesn't mean I'm inherently lost. You could be at home building a life that looks perfect on paper, and still you feel completely misaligned. You're uncertain whether what you're doing fulfills you. So just because you see someone traveling and kind of figuring stuff out as they go does not mean that they're lost. But secondly, and this is really beautiful, a friend recently said something to me about this idea of being lost. And he said, being lost isn't about geography. It's not about not knowing where you're going next or not having a plan. Being truly lost is not having something that you care about, not having something that moves you or excites you or gives your life meaning. And I guess that's how I would put it. I might not always know where I'm going, but I always know why. Ooh, next question is interesting. If you had to settle down tomorrow, which city would you choose and why? This is such a hard question. Mostly because I really don't see myself settling down anytime soon. Maybe not ever. I've really done my best to build a life that thrives on movement and reinvention, and I think because of that, the idea of choosing just one place feels a little bit impossible to me. But if you forced me to pick a city tomorrow, I would choose Buenos Aires, Argentina. Definitely. The people, the culture, the energy, it felt very me. Buenos Aires is this intoxicating blend of spicy Latin America and old world Europe. Like if Paris and Madrid and Medellin had this beautiful chaotic child, that would be Buenos Aires. It's got that romantic European elegance, but with, I think, a wild, unpredictable heartbeat underneath it. Their work-life balance there is also really something I admire. people actually live. They linger over coffee, they take long walks, they talk for hours in parks. And the streets are filled late into the night with people just having dinner, having drinks. And there's this collective understanding that time is meant to be savored, not conquered. And I also think creatively, the city is a dream. The bookstores are endless. The theaters are intimate and they're alive. And the museums. The nightlife is electric, but not superficial. It's really about conversation, community, energy. You can go out alone and come home with 10 new friends. And somehow it never feels lonely. I think it's the city where I felt most connected to the people of the city in general. So if I ever had to stop moving, I think it would be there. Although I also know that that's only 50% of my heart. The other 50% wants to live on the beach in a shack and just wake up and jump in the ocean and hear the waves while I sleep and wear flowers in my hair and drink coconuts every day. So I think it's so hard to decide. Next question, what do you miss most about South Africa and how do you deal with missing home? It's funny because most of the time I really don't miss home at all. I love South Africa. I love my family. But again, it's just a personality thing. It's a me thing that movement for me feels like home. I think that I can honestly say, and I'm really grateful to be able to say this, but I think that I feel like home for myself. And so wherever I take myself, that place tends to feel like home. Of course, it's also about the energy of the place, the people you meet. But in general, I can honestly say that I've felt at home everywhere where I've been. But of course, every now and then, I do go through seasons of, I wouldn't call it longing or missing, but I would call it nostalgia. A time when maybe I just think more about home. I think more about South Africa and my culture and my family and just the energy of being at home. It's not that I'm missing it, but I am craving to feel a little bit closer to it in certain time periods. And I'm in one of those seasons right now. For the past week, I've been listening to Spulfolf and Jan Blom and Tientje Dawn on repeat. When I do start to kind of feel nostalgic about home, I would listen to a lot more Afrikaans music, the kind of songs that remind me of sitting around the campfire and drinking wine with my dad, or songs that take me right back to my university days in Stellenbosch. There's something about those voices and the lyrics that make me feel anchored again, even if I'm thousands of miles away. And obviously, I also call my parents a lot. We video call. And then there are, of course, the smaller sensory things about home that I do miss. I mean, I miss the wine. Really? I know it sounds ridiculous, but I do think that South Africa has the best wine in the whole world. And it's so much cheaper back home. And for anybody out there who isn't South African saying that this isn't true, fun fact, South Africa never exports the good stuff. So whatever you find abroad is almost never what we actually drink at home. So if you want to have an argument with me about South African wine, I want you to go to South Africa first and do a few wine tastings in Stellenbosch, and then we'll talk again. I've had some really snooty French and Italian wine connoisseurs who have actually visited South Africa admit to me that we have the best wine. So that's one thing. I also miss the smell of the bushveld after rain. And I miss Woolies. And I miss really good sushi because, strangely enough, I think South Africa is really good sushi, even compared to Asia. But I've learned that missing home doesn't mean you want to go back. There are parts of home, people, family, smells, sounds, that have shaped you so deeply that they travel with you wherever you go. And sometimes there are times when you think about them more and you want to feel more connected with them. That's how I would describe my relationship with longing, with home. Okay, so now the questions go a little bit more into my creative and work life, writing, and so forth. So, what does a typical day look like for you on the road? Ooh, it really depends where I am. My days look completely different depending on the season of travel that I'm in. A life in a big city feels completely different from life by the beach. So right now, for example, I'm in Hoi An, which is a little town in the south of Vietnam, right by the ocean. So my days definitely have a slower rhythm. Most mornings, I wake up slowly, I journal a little bit, I have a coffee, I ease into the day instead of rushing into it. That for me is peak luxury. And something I need to feel grounded is easing into my morning. Then I'll usually head to a Pilates class. I found this lovely studio here that's become my little morning ritual. And then afterwards, I will shower, eat a proper breakfast, and then go to preferably a co-working space or maybe a cafe and then work there for the rest of the day. So I tried to then dedicate the first few hours of my day to my creative work. Things like writing for my blog, recording the podcast, editing, planning book club content. Because mornings are when I feel most inspired and mentally fresh before I then go into my full-time job. So I usually start my work day working on my job around noon or 1 p.m. And the 3 hours before that, I would be working on creative stuff. And then depending on the workload, I will log off anywhere between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., sometimes later, sometimes a bit earlier. If I'm by the beach, I like to squeeze in a morning swim or a barefoot walk along the shore before work. If I'm in a city, I love going for a run, finding a new coffee shop, or going on a little podcast walk, just walking without direction, listening, thinking, stuff like that. And then my evenings are for movement or connection. Sometimes around sunset time, I would take a break from work if I haven't logged off already, and I would go for a long walk, or I would meet friends for dinner or join any community events. So, for instance, the co-working space where I'm a member at right now recently hosted a sip and paint night last week, but also sometimes they have bachata classes or salsa classes. And it's then just so nice to be around other people who are also loving this unconventional type of life and who want to do a dance class on a random Tuesday night just to feel connected to people. So it's really fun. And then weekends are my time to explore. That's when I will wander local markets or visit nearby towns or do a little bit of tourist attractions. But then, of course, I also have weekends where I just want to do nothing, just like you would at home. I'll spend the day being lazy or reading or catching up on sleep or doing laundry. And in the beginning, I felt really guilty about those kind of weekends because I would feel like I'm in this new country, I'm supposed to be seeing so much, I can't waste a weekend. But after doing this for such a long time, I realized that this is my life. This is something I want to do long term, something I want to do full time. So I need to have some grace with myself and also have balance and allow myself to do the type of stuff we do at home. So maybe stay in one night and just binge watch a series or something like that. So I've learned to be a little bit more easy on myself when it comes to how I spend my time and not always feeling the pressure to be a tourist, because really I'm not. But in general, I don't like to have too much of a rigid routine. Although I do love the small little rituals that come with each new place and kind of form by themselves, like finding my favorite coffee shop or my favorite route to walk each morning or a local event that I look forward to. It's really comforting. That's part of what I love most about this lifestyle, is that you get to reinvent your days with every new place that you land in. I don't mind working many hours a day because I get to decide today that, oh, I want to maybe go to this coffee shop and work there. Or I want to go sit in a cafe by the beach and work there. Or I just want to stay in my room or go to a co-working space or meet up with friends who are also working remotely and work with them. So for me, it doesn't even feel like work when I have that kind of freedom of place. Next question. What are 3 skills you've learned while traveling? Ooh, this is an interesting one. The first that comes to mind is definitely learning how to make friends with anyone. I think socializing is one of those underrated life skills that solo traveling really teaches you. You get good at reading people, starting conversations out of thin air, finding common ground across language barriers and cultural differences, and you learn how to make yourself and other people feel at home anywhere. And that's something I'll carry with me forever. So that's the first one. The second one is I've learned how to ride a scooter to absolute perfection. And I'm actually currently also learning how to ride a manual motorbike. So let's see how that goes. But yes, riding the scooter for me was something that just made me feel really wildly capable and free. And there's something so empowering about weaving through traffic in a completely foreign country with the wind in your hair and music playing through your AirPods, and you're just in complete control of your own movement, especially after I navigated some of India's most hectic cities with my own scooter. That felt really cool. And then a third skill I learned while traveling. Well, I've learned how to roll a cigarette. I probably shouldn't say that too loudly, but it's definitely a skill that I didn't think I would ever have. But hey, travel surprises you and it teaches you those funny little practical things that you didn't expect. If I can sneak in one more thing that I've learned, I would say adaptability. Definitely the ability to stay calm when plans fall apart, when flights get canceled, when you get sick, when you have to start over in a new place for the 10th time. And that's the real muscle that you build as a traveler, I think, learning to trust that you will figure it out because you always do. Now, for questions more about, I guess you would say, the inner world, human relationships, stuff like that. Firstly, how do you deal with heartbreak and saying goodbye while traveling? And again, I want to combine this with other questions that I often get about how do you deal with heartbreak and closure in general? A while ago, I released a podcast episode about closure and how it's a myth and what you really need after a bad breakup to really find closure. And the episode did really well. And after that, I got a bunch of questions kind of more relating to that. So I want to throw that in with the question of how do I deal with saying goodbye and heartbreak while traveling? That's definitely the hardest part of living this kind of life. I'm constantly meeting new people who I'm really connecting with. Deep friendships are formed, and then you have to say goodbye. But I do think that heartbreak on the road looks a little different than what you would naturally think heartbreak is. The heartbreak I experience isn't always romantic. Sometimes it's just that ache of leaving behind a version of myself that maybe only existed in one specific place. Or I'm saying goodbye to friends who felt like family for a few fleeting weeks. And yes, I fall in love with these people. I fall in love with friends, with cities, and little daily rituals that vanish the moment you move on, you know? And in the beginning, I used to resist it. I would really try to hold on and I would want to keep the conversation going and I would make promises to reunite with people. And while that's lovely in theory, I think it often just keeps you anchored to a moment that's already gone. And it's also quite impossible to try and stay in contact with everybody that I've connected with and to try and meet up again with everybody. It's just too much, especially for me, because I'm never on my phone and I hate messaging or answering people. It doesn't mean I don't love them. I just really hate messaging. So it's really difficult to try and keep in contact then. So I had to kind of realize that that's an unattainable goal or dream. So now I try to approach it differently. When I feel something deeply for someone or somewhere, I just let myself really feel it. I let it matter, but I don't try to own it. And I've learned that some connections maybe are meant to be short and powerful and not permanent. Some friendships are just beautiful experiences and they're not destinations or forever connections. And that doesn't make it any less meaningful. But then also practically, when I'm saying goodbye or maybe I'm grieving or I'm going through a heartbreak, I just write a lot. Get my thoughts out there. I move my body. I walk until my mind feels like it's starting to clear. I listen to music that matches the ache that I'm feeling in my chest. And I remind myself that grief is proof that I was open and that I allowed something or someone to touch me emotionally. And that is a beautiful thing. Travel has taught me how to hold love and loss at the same time. And when you can do that, you start to realize that goodbyes aren't endings, they're transitions. Every city gives you something and takes something from you. You change a little with every new place, with every new person you meet. And every time you say goodbye, you carry a new version of yourself into the next chapter. So how do I deal with it? I don't run from it. I let it move through me. Because even though it sucks in the moment, you later realize that every goodbye means that you were brave enough to care in the first place. The next question, which oddly enough I also get quite often, is, have you ever fallen in love while traveling? Yes, of course I have. If we're speaking strictly romantic, definitely. But I've also learned that travel romances have their own rhythm. They tend to burn really bright and fast, and then sometimes they fade just as quickly. And I think part of that intensity comes from knowing deep down that this probably won't last. There's something about the temporariness of it all that makes you more open and vulnerable and more present. And you share long dinners and unplanned adventures and these late night confessions. And all of it happens in a fraction of the time it would take back at home to build that kind of connection. So then the connection feels really magnified by the setting and the spontaneity and the sense that the moment itself is fleeting. So looking back, I can see that some of what I thought in the moment was me falling in love might have been more about circumstance, maybe the magic of place, or the high of making a connection while in motion. And that's definitely not to say it wasn't real, it just belonged to its moment, almost like a postcard version of love. That's not something that would have lasted forever in any sense of the word, but it was still beautiful for what it was. But that being said, right now, I find myself in a very unexpected situation. So I've met someone here in Hoi An, and I mean, this is a safe space, right? I can tell you that this feels different. It's more grounded, it's more patient, and it feels really real. I'm trying not to rush into it or define it too soon or put pressure on it. But for the first time in a long time, I see potential in something that feels like more than just a beautiful chapter or a beautiful place. It's caught me quite off guard, actually, but I'm open to being surprised. And that, I think, is the best part about love. It keeps reminding you that no matter how much you think you know yourself, or how much control you think you have, life can still astonish you. But let's keep that one between us, okay? Next question. Have you changed as a person since you started traveling, and if so, how? Absolutely. 100%. I've changed in ways that are very visible and in ways that only I can feel. Because when I first started traveling, I was this wide-eyed, idealistic little girl. I felt magic in everything, and I was constantly swept up in the romance of it all, and I said yes to everything, and I trusted everyone. But then somewhere along the way, I also kind of realized that the world can be sharp. I've seen the good and the bad in people, more good, definitely more good than bad, but I've seen both sides. And I think I've learned to hold both without flinching. So yes, I would say that I'm definitely less naive now, but I'm definitely not cynical. My worldview is maybe hardened or sharpened in some places, but not in a negative way. I think that I just see things more clearly, myself included. I don't have these giggly rose-tinted glasses on anymore. But that's what makes things even more meaningful, when you can see it for what it is. I think I'm more grounded now. I'm definitely more discerning about who and what I give my energy to. But I'm also, I think, softer in ways that really matter. Like, I'm more curious. I'm more patient. I'm more willing to listen. I think one of the biggest shifts has been actually in how I see myself. Because before I started traveling, I was very aware of how I was perceived. I remember in high school and university, what people thought of me was really important. And it was a kind of a version of myself that I was performing. I used to carry this constant awareness of my reputation and how I was coming across. But somewhere along the way in the past couple of years, that all really fell away. And now I just feel totally open and I feel fully myself. I don't care what people think, and I don't mean that I'm careless. I still care deeply about how I treat people, about being kind and how people feel around me, but I no longer shape my life around other people's expectations or the image that I think I should be upholding. And there's something really freeing about living a life that doesn't require that kind of validation anymore. Maybe the biggest transformation of all has been in what I define as success. Because again, when I was younger, I thought success meant being impressive. It meant having a big title, income, that validation that we were speaking of. But now I think success is much quieter and so much deeper. And right now, success for me is really living a life that feels like mine, a life that I consciously chose and curated. And it's knowing myself well enough to understand what makes me feel alive, and then being brave enough to build a life around that freedom. The freedom to have, for example, slow mornings, to decide where I want to live next week, to choose work that excites me, and to have the time and the mental energy to be creative and kind and grounded. Travel has taught me that the world doesn't reward you for being busy or impressive. It actually rewards you for being awake, for noticing the details, and for building a life that feels like it actually fits you. So yes, I've definitely changed. The girl who started this journey wanted to prove herself, but I think that the woman I'm becoming just wants to be herself, fully, freely, and without apology. Another question, what are you reading or listening to right now that's really shaping your thinking? Ooh, okay. So I'm one of those people who always has like 5 different things on the go. I'm listening to podcasts, I'm reading multiple books at the same time. I love reading essays online. So it's really a little bit of everything. But at the moment, some of the podcasts that I'm loving are Women Who Travel by Condé Nast Traveler. Such a comforting listen for anyone who loves stories about movement and belonging. And obviously for the phase of life I'm in right now, I love listening to it. Another one is Critics at Large by The New Yorker. Amazing. Another one is Modern Love by The New York Times. It always makes me cry in the best possible way. And then for my inner philosophy nerd, The Partially Examined Life is a great podcast to listen to if you're in the mood for something that stretches your brain a bit. As for books, I'm actually currently reading Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert. And yes, I know it's such a cultural touchstone, but we all think of the movie when we hear Eat, Pray, Love, right? But a friend actually told me that I had to read the book, even though I know the movie by heart. He said that it's so much funnier and sharper and more introspective than the movie, even though the movie is already amazing. And now that I'm reading it, I completely agree. The book hits different. So do yourself a favor, read Eat, Pray, Love, the book. I also recently read The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri for the Lost and Found book club. And this is a collection of short stories about the Indian American immigrant experience. And it's written in this beautiful, quiet, emotionally precise, relatable way. And if you want to join the book club, by the way, I'll leave the link in the description. It's a really nice space for reflective readers. And then lastly, I recently reread The Right to Sex by Amiya Srinivasan. It's a collection of essays that I first studied in my 3rd year of university, and it's an incredibly powerful and nuanced exploration of feminism, the politics of desire, how our sexuality is shaped by power and culture and self-perception. And it's one of those books that really reminds me why I fell in love with philosophy in the first place. It makes you question the things that you've always taken for granted. And it's philosophy about stuff that we deal with in our everyday lives, and that's really relevant to us, especially in our 20s. So also amazing collection of essays. Final question. If you could leave listeners with one piece of advice, a question or a reminder, what would it be? This one is difficult because there's so much I want to tell you, but if I had to pick one, I would say, stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the perfect timing or the right amount of money or the right person or the next sign from the universe. No one's going to hand you a certificate saying that you're finally ready because you're not supposed to feel ready. You're supposed to begin anyway. Clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from moving. Every city I've lived in, every risk I've taken, every time I've made a complete mess of things, that's where the real learning happened. Because you can make all the lists you want, or journal, or read books, or plan, but at some point, you have to get out there and actually live. You have to be brave enough to make a decision before you know how it will end or how it will work out. You have to be brave enough to embarrass yourself and to admit that comfort and meaning rarely exist in the same place. I want to say that again. Be brave enough to admit that comfort and meaning rarely exist in the same place. So if you need a sign, this is it. Start that project, write the book, book the ticket, leave the job, have that confronting conversation. Move to the city that scares you. Whatever it is, stop waiting for life to begin and start meeting it halfway. Because yes, sometimes things happen and we're lucky and life surprises us. But It can only happen if you actually put yourself in the path of possibility. So start meeting life halfway. Life doesn't reward the people who have it all figured out. It rewards the ones who show up anyway. And spoiler alert, 99% of the time, it works out. Maybe not in the way you thought it would, but in the way that it needs to. If only you take the leap and do the thing. Okay, that's it. We've made it to the end of this little Q&A experiment. I didn't expect to go this deep. I thought I would be talking about backpacks and travel insurance, but somehow we ended up talking about love and identity and freedom and the meaning of home. But then again, that's what this podcast is about, right? How the small questions always end up leading to the big ones. So if you sent in a question, thank you. Truly, it means a lot that you care enough to ask, to listen, and to be a part of this little corner of the internet that we're building together. And if there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, it's that there isn't one right way to live. Whether you're in motion, or you're rooted, or you're chasing adventure, or building a life in one place, the only thing that matters is that it feels like yours. You chose this life. You are building this life. Wherever in the world you are right now, I'm grateful that you chose to spend this time with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please, it would mean the world to me if you hit subscribe, if you left a rating or a review, or maybe share it with someone who needs a little reminder to live their life wide open. And as always, don't forget to get a little lost this week. That's where the magic finds you. Until next time.